Hi, everybody. The Constitution is definitely a tough act to follow, but I will try my best here. So I'm going to talk a bit about my artwork. I am not a lawyer. My artwork investigates the human's relationship with algorithms, automation, and amplification. And I do this by using experimentation and prototyping, absurdity and humor, mischief and play. Hopefully some of that will come through. I'm going to talk a bit about where I started with machine learning. I put AI in parentheses there. It's interesting when I started working out with some of these tools, the use of the term AI was a bit controversial because it brings up certain ideas. But ideas like machine learning and deep learning are, I think, interchangeable at this point. One of the first algorithms I worked with was something called Deep Dream. And Deep Dream is something that Google put out where it would look at an image and try to find a pattern internally, and it would keep amplifying that pattern recognition to see things that weren't there. So you'll see a little bit of that here. You can watch more of this online. It turned into one of my more viral things, not so much because of where I posted it, but pieces and parts of it were pulled out into TikTok and other places. I also worked with things called GANs, which were generative adversarial networks. These weren't things like text-to-image like you experience today. Basically, you would train them on data sets of images, and these data sets would turn into a model, and you were able to create more things which were like these images. So one thing that I did is I hand-curated a data set of 50,000 album covers and fed it into this GAN called StyleGAN and trained it from there. And it created outputs that looked kind of like things you'd see on album covers, but not quite right. You can see it learned things like where the text should be. Funny enough, on the top left, you can see the parental advisory sticker that sort of came through, but it's a bit jumbled there. One of the cool things you could do with GANs was to explore the latent space. Well, that's to move around the model where it would have different outputs, and you can output basically a frame for each spot you would go there. And by doing this, you could create things like videos. So here's an example of that. This is moving around circularly in this latent space. So each point in this space is a different image. And again, this is pre-text to image. So the way you would control these models to create images is you would go through the latent space and try to find outputs, try to find vectors which would represent things. So you might find a vector which represented text. You might find a vector on a model like faces that might represent something like glasses, but those are things you had to find. Today's text to image models are a lot more complex than this, and they I think allow a lot more control on the output. So getting into things which are a bit more modern, in 2020 I was lucky enough to get beta access to GPT back in the day, and this is when I was in lockdown in my studio, and we weren't able to do things like the usual collaborations we were often able to do as an artist, so I started collaborating with AI, which was kind of a weird idea. One of the things I was exploring to get this AI to do was to generate descriptions of wall labels like you might see here at SF MoMA. And what I wanted to do is curate from those wall labels, find ones which I thought were interesting or funny, and then create artworks based on the description. So basically the AI was telling me what to do. So here's one of the first sculptures that I created coming out of there. This is, I think this could be parked next to a Duchamp urinal somewhere. But I'll read the output that the AI had made. And keep in mind, this is an early version of GPT. Back then, it wasn't so much conversational. It was something called text completion, where you would give it text and would go from there. I'll read the description here. The plunger contains a plunger, a toilet plunger, a plunger, a plunger, a plunger, and a plunger, each of which has been modified. The first plunger is simply a normal plunger, but the rest represent a series of plungers with more and more of the handle removed until just a rubber cup is left. The title of the artwork is A Short History of Plungers and Other Things That Go Plunge in the Night. And it said MoMA bought it in 1973, but also that they formed a movement in the 70s called Plungism, and it's about the conceptualization and promotion of a new art form called plungism, and it's a state of mind where the mind of an artist is in a state of flux and able to be influenced by all things, even plungers, which I think sounds pretty credible. Had to create other outputs, so this was an example of something which it described as toothpicks dipped in beeswax, and the art is about colony collapse disorder. Again, this is completely fictional creation here. You can see a couple more outputs there. Another description was a scrambled flip clock on top of a can of Dinty Moore stew. And this one is interesting because it said that the artist ate the stew in order to stay alive. And it says the artist is physically trapped and has no way to escape. And many have speculated about the meaning of the particular can of stew that the artist used as a pedestal, so it's still a mystery today. So I've gone through a few iterations with this idea of collaborating with AI. The first one you saw there with the plungers and these other ideas where the AI describes an artwork and then I make it. There are other modalities where AI describes something and someone else makes it. Certainly, there's a lot of examples of this in this museum where people would work with either artisans or studio assistants to make things. When text-to-image came out, the logical thing was to take the description from one AI and feed it into the next one to create an image. So that's what I did when DALL-E came out. So you could have basically an AI describe something that then is made in the image, and then you could perhaps take that image to make something in real life. More recently, with the multimodal models that can do things like look at images and describe them, I can do something like make anything into an artwork where the AI describes that thing as an artwork. So I can look at, like, say, this microphone over here and have the AI create a wall label justifying the microphone as a piece of modern art. So I'll show a few examples of these. So here's a description I gave to my graffiti artist friend who interpreted the meaning of the work within his vernacular, and he was able to create an output there for me. You can probably recognize shapes like the cool S and things over time. Yeah, there it comes out. Yeah, things like paintings made a lot of sense. So there's a lot of people who do reproduction paintings in the world. There's a whole economy built around those. So yeah, it took the description that came off one AI, fed it through DALL-E, got an image, and then that image was hand painted with oil paint. So one of these is AI generated, the other is hand painted. And like everything, it comes up with interesting titles. So it titled this one, Billy and Malm Have an Argument About Putting Together a Lax Side Table and Decide to Get a Divorce. So it was all about IKEA and frustration and things that people see in their everyday lives. Yeah, and moving to more familiar media like sculpture. So on the left here, you'll see a DALL-E created image of a bronze. That bronze image was then turned into a 3D model. So you get the back and all sides of that. That 3D model was then full-size 3D printed at a foundry in Berkeley. That 3D print is then covered in a casting, and then they pour in bronze, so the bronze melts out that 3D print. It's done in 3 pieces. After the casting is done, which involves a lot of fire, it's all welded together. And TIG welding is actually an art form on its own, so yeah, it's missing the little feather on the top, so it had to feather the head and the bottom. After the TIG welding is done, you get this super shiny copper-looking thing, but over time this would turn into different colors. So then it goes to a patina artist who uses fire and acid to put the final touch on there. Then you get something which looks very much like what you started with the AI image and the description. So here you can see that a little bit. And then adding a little bit more automation into this idea, I started with this image of this kind of ear sculpture. Again, went through the process of turning into a 3D model. But this time, the 3D model was given to robots in a giant slab of marble, and that marble was slowly carved out over time using different sized bits. You can see that here. And then that still has to go to human artisans to finish by hand. So there's still human touch there, which is quite interesting. I like to show these videos because it shows just how many artisans and other humans I've brought into these processes where AI was just part of the creative input. And here it is at my museum show at the Crocker, rotating around a little bit there. And And I'm quite interested in interactive works as well. So here's one that I had also at the museum. Over time, over the 7 months I had my show up, people actually made 25,000 artworks. The public did that. So the public comes up and they can speak anything that comes to their imagination. So in this case, I think she's describing, we'll see it on the top there, a minimal artwork, green. And the AI basically takes what you say and expands it into a longer description. You have 4 artworks you can choose from. And once you choose that artwork, your artwork is combined with the work before you into a never-ending strip of works, kind of creating this massively collaborative, exquisite corpse. And yeah, you get a receipt at the end with a QR code to your image. This was very, very popular. People would come back to the museum over time to do this multiple times. They'd also like text people at home to see what they wanted to try. Yeah, so it was quite great to see the public interact with these things. Yeah, this being, I guess, primarily a law conference, I want to talk a little bit about the response to like creative automation, because I feel like law is kind of a applied philosophy of what we want to see happen in the world. So here's a quote about it. The industry, by invading the territories of art, has become art's most mortal enemy, which is a pretty strong statement. Oh, sorry, that was about the camera in 1859. So back then, they really thought that photography was for lazy artists. So they said, as the photographic industry became the refuge of all failed painters with too little talent or too lazy to complete their studies, this universal craze not only assumed the air of blind imbecile infatuation, but also took the aspect of revenge, which echoes a lot of what I hear today. If you look over history, you'll see a lot of this. In the 1930s, there was the Music Defense League, who would take out advertisements in magazines against canned music in theaters. They thought basically recorded music in theaters would be the end of like musicians as we know them. So they made all these robots that were like destroying art, basically. So here's one that's a picture no robot can paint, kind of this robot trying to paint something. Is the robot fooling you? Again, this is about like recordings of music, which today we see kind of as absurd. The robot as an entertainer making the cherub cry. The robot kind of yelling at this musician, is art to have a tyrant? So yeah, I just urge us all to look to history for responses we see today for creative automation and that sort of thing. There's obviously still a lot of things that need to be figured out, but I think we can balance pessimism with optimism. So I'd like to show a few prototypes of what I had been working on during my residency. So keep in mind, these are prototypes, so a lot of these things aren't quite finished. I had been investigating how to create very high resolution output artworks. So these are artworks that no like person would be able to make. So as we zoom in here, you can see more and more detail over time. This is using a methodology called outpainting, and these images turn out to be over 500 megapixels. You can print them out really big, and you still can't really see all the details. Doing things like upscaling and looking at complexity and different aesthetic outputs. I was also looking at how to extend ideas of photography. So, you know, how can you use AI to extend creativity? How can you use it to push your internal idea of what you should capture into new outputs? So also using kind of absurdity as a lens to look through. So again, these are prototypes, so excuse the camera work here. So this is a camera I built that you can point it at an object and it will make an absurd label for that object. So this is also being done in real time here. Here it comes out there. So it called this wrench a grip twister, which I thought's quite funny. These are real labels you can stick on stuff. So here's a notebook I had. I called it a Thought Keeper, Scribble Vault, Ink Wrangler, or Idea Burrito. This is obviously a yellow boomerang. Spicy Rooster Booster, which I think is great. And yeah, I had mentioned in one of my slides, like you can kind of point AI at things in a can come up with a wall label for that. So here's a bunch of stuff I put together as a sculpture on a table, and I'm going to point the camera at it. Yep, here it is taking a picture. Again, this is kind of in real time. What it's doing is it's not only looking at what's in the picture, it's looking at the context of what's in the picture, how everything relates to each other, what one thing might mean next to, like why is that paperclip on the left and the thing on the right. So it's not just image recognition, it's actually like a type of image understanding. So what it's doing right now is printing out on a receipt printer a wall label I could just stick up next to this thing. And yeah, again, excuse the camera here, but I'll read a little bit. It called it The Grasp of Transience, and it's a provocative assemblage that eloquently encapsulates the ephemeral nature of human interaction with everyday objects. It's about the post-industrial human condition, challenging the viewer to reflect on the dispossibility of modern life and our fleeting encounters with the objects that pass through our hands. And that makes quotes by me too, which is good. The work is an exploration of the intersections between utility and impermanence. So I've been playing with different modes that this camera should have, like you might change different exposure modes on things. So here's one mode that turns it into a poetry camera about Tic Tacs. Within a clear case, they snugly rest, strawberries and cream, they're dubbed the best. Tiny, but with a burst a flavor so grand, in pockets and purses, they always land. If anyone works for Tic Tac, just give me a call. Other ideas of taking a picture of a thing that's not actually the picture, but an idea of that picture. So here's a picture of some of the dinner I had, and it came up with an image of that thing, which is not that thing. The interesting thing is once you move imagery into the textual conceptual space, you then can change ideas about it. So you can change, for example, how it's represented. So in this case, it's represented as like a black and white kind of pixely print. Here's a case where I took a picture of the plungers in the studio, but you can see other things around me that are quite complicated, like the stained glass behind me and the fact I'm holding a camera looking at the thing. So I was quite interested in also moving photography back into the physical space. So I took a picture of this. It comes out as a Instax Polaroid on this little printer here over Bluetooth. You can see it come out. And just like the old-time Polaroids, it takes a couple of minutes to turn into an image. So I'll skip right to that. You can see the picture I took on the left and the picture that it generated on the right. So it's not a picture of that picture, it's a picture of the idea of that picture, which I find quite interesting. Obviously, you can do things like move it into other spaces. So here's one of my roommate's cats, and the idea of what that cat's doing and where it is kind of turned into a different artistic output. And doing things like changing video. So this is a video that Sora had done, which you're able to do photogrammetry to. So I was able to turn this into a 3D image. And here's where it actually saw the virtual camera tracking over that image. And the fact that Sora can create outputs which are 3D capable is quite interesting. So here's one where it's a sculpture rotating around its center, and here are all the data points of where it thinks the 3D nature of that is. So I took, see, that rotates. That might be paused. Yeah. So this usually rotates. So there's a rotation of this sculpture. Right now I'm turning that into using that process that you had seen before, using the robots into a live marble sculpture with this block from Italy. And the last mode I've been playing with is turning really bad drawings into imagery. So here's the drawing on the left that I took a picture of and made, and here's the image on the right that it came up with. Here's another one, again, terrible drawings, but kind of made an idea of that. Here's a couple I gave to friends to try. Yeah, people love houses. And obviously, like, kind of the final state is to, here's something I drew. I was waiting for an airplane on a napkin, and then I had this stuff with me. So it not only made it a photograph of that, it made the wall label for this entire artwork. So this entire thing now has a description for it. And the last thing I'll leave you with is an interesting project I did back, I think in 2015 is when I started it. I had found out that you could publish anything online within certain parameters, and it could be called something called prior art, where no one else could patent that thing. And I was like, that's interesting. It seems like that law wasn't written with the idea that there'd be machines in the future that could just keep writing ideas and putting them out there. So I made a little project that I would just keep coming up with ideas algorithmically and publishing them online called All Prior Art, where I was hoping just to point out this idea, even if it wasn't legally sound. And then fast forward to a year ago, I'm getting all these weird pings on my website from Australia Patent Office, from USPTO, from WIPO, and other acronyms. And it turns out they're all quite interested in this project all of a sudden because it's more plausible now than it was in the past. So one thing I would look to artists to be as well are kind of early warning systems for the future, because as we're unconstrained by a lot of the usual things in creativity, I think we can kind of see what's coming a bit quicker than most other folks. Thank you.